Hi there, I'm David, and in this video I am going to be taking a look at Sonible's new Smart Comp 3 Spectral compressor. I have been very excited about getting a copy of this, and Sonible were kind enough to give me an NFR, not for resale, code to access it on the day of release, which was yesterday, or the day before. Yesterday, I think. And I am now here to review it for you with the specific kind of context of audio engineering for dialogue specifically. I'm not going to touch on how it is as a compressor for music. I don't mix music. I just work with dialogue and primarily audiobooks. So let's get into looking at the plugin. Here we are. I've set up a project to talk a little about the plugin. So I'm going to play some of these demos while we're at it. Sonible's new plugin combines the regular stuff. So it combines conventional time domain compression with their proprietary Spectral compression engine. And it uses analysis, what they call their learning function of the signal, to suggest and visualize suitable compression settings. I'm going to be really opinionated in this video. I will show you what the plugin does on my voice. I will tell you where it has improved over Smart Comp 2, and where I think the new ideas, especially the more semantic controls, don't really help very much or can even kind of get in the way. So, what is new in Smart Comp 3? So, compared with Smart Comp 2, the big additions are a new compression matrix and scope to visualize and steer the smart settings, a group mode that lets you control several instances from one window, and a true zero latency minimum phase mode so you can finally use it comfortably while doing live work. On top of that, Sonible have reworked the styles and input riding, but the kind of the core spectrodynamic compression idea does remain the same. So let me talk a bit about the DSP, the digital signal processing, the maths that's used to analyze and manipulate digital audio. So the main smart layer in Smart Comp 3 is on top of kind of the compression, the conventional compression aspects. And that is how it analyzes the signal. So it listens to the input, works out a region of compression settings that it thinks are musically reasonable for that material. And it exposes that region as the compression matrix and the compression scope overlay. So on the compression scope, the dense, the dynamic, the snappy and the punchy, this is just different ways of using terminology to talk about the analyzed parameter space. So when you hit Learn, that's the button up here, and it's very familiar if you've ever used a Sonible plugin before. Smart Comp 3 listens to a short section of audio, not customizable, unlike Smart EQ4, and fills in the compression matrix for you. So it suggests what it thinks are sensible combinations of the threshold, ratio, attack, release, etc. for that signal, and puts them into the matrix and scope view. In the case of my dialogue, it provides a quite long but very, very thin scope of what we've got here. So this matrix is new in version 3. On the one axis, we've got snappy to punchy, and on the other, we've got dynamic through to dense. Moving towards snappy means faster, more transient focused behavior. Moving towards punchy gives you more weight and impact. Dynamic gives more of the natural movement, and dense pushes towards a more glued, consistently loud sound. Under the hood, it's still just standard compressor parameters. This is just a different way of steering them. On dialogue, I think the learned suggestions are not especially helpful. So as you can see, I've been given this long stream of options, and they don't even recommend what I'm aiming for. In fact, if you look here, in fact, let's pull a different window up. Let's pull this one up, where I've got my multiple pass, my serial compression. You can see I've got passes here, including pass 1, that isn't even in the region of suggested learning. Contrast that to Sonible Smart EQ4, where I find the learning genuinely useful. Here, the learning typically proposes thresholds of -30, -35, -40, which honestly is a bit mad. It basically means it's suggesting compressing the entire dynamic range of the spoken word rather than controlling the specific peaks. I do something kind of similar, but you'll see in a minute that my kind of serial compression approach only affects some of the audio with a threshold like that, and only very gently. So for me, I treat the learn function as a bit of a curiosity rather than a starting point for dialogue. I really wouldn't blindly trust it on voice work. Onto the styles. Now, before I talk about the styles, it's worth saying why harmonics matter at all. So a harmonic is a multiple of a bass frequency. So if your voice has a fundamental at 200 hertz, your harmonics show up at 400, 600, 800, and so on. And those are the even harmonics. I believe they're the even harmonics that are considered nice and musical. I'm not an expert at musical theory. There are also odd harmonics that I believe are typically considered a bit less pleasant. But it is the balance between harmonics in our voice that is a big part of what we hear as timbre or tone. Even if your speech is coming out predominantly at 200 hertz, there will be spikes of audio at lower levels at 400, 600, 800, etc. So this creates one of the problems that I have because I prefer to use serial compression of typically 4 compressors in a row. And that means I'm not only changing the dynamics, I am affecting the saturation multiple times. So on a clean linear processor, having 4 serial compressors is fine. On a characterful compressor that add harmonics, it's quite easy to stack the color in a multiplicative way. Which is it's very strange. There's a horse going past my window. Which is why I care about what style actually does to the dialogue. So, harmonic coloration, which is how the style applies in terms of stuff like the custom style, is the change of tone that comes from adding or emphasizing harmonics and specific harmonics relative to the fundamental. So low order harmonic content makes a voice feel fuller or closer. High order harmonics tend to make it sound bright, edgy, or in bad ways, fatiguing. And saturation is the mechanism that creates that extra harmonic content. So in practice, that means that as you get louder, as you push the signal louder, it doesn't get louder in a straight line. It bends into a softer curve that generates overtones. So gently, it can thicken or stabilize a voice. Push too hard, and very easy to do this in series, it becomes very processed sounding and tiring to listen to. So in Smart Comp 3, saturation is built into the style system. So clean aims to be effectively unsaturated. Smooth aims to be more colourful, as does aggressive, and custom style lets you control both how much saturation is applied and how its curve behaves as you push into the gain reduction. So that is powerful, but it means your choice of style is a choice about tone. It's not just about the envelope shape of the compressor. So, as I said, there are 4 main styles in Smart Comp 3. There's clean, smooth, aggressive, and custom. In this review, I have set up the test conditions pretty much identically. I have, in each case, used a serial chain of 4 instances. All are at a 1.4 to 1 ratio. All have a soft knee. And the thresholds and attacks are staggered. So the first one has an attack of 50 milliseconds, the second 45, the third 40, the fourth 35. And inversely, with the thresholds, the first one has an 8 decibel threshold, second 16, third 24, fourth 32. So that means the loudest stuff is affected by 4 compressors, the quietest stuff is affected by 1, and in a fairly gentle way. So what you're going to hear if I show these to you is the effect of the style engine and the saturation. It's not in any way because I've changed the actual basic compression centers. And one quick note, one of the things that drove me mad about Smart Comp 2 was the knee settings. Even if you dragged knee to soft or hard, as soon as you reopened the compressor again, it appeared to be back in the default position. It was never really possible to know without actually going into too much effort to analyze the audio whether the knee change was actually working. Here, without a doubt, soft knee, medium knee, hard knee. If you're looking very carefully, you can see the knee on the screen changing over here. So I'm pretty confident it actually works properly in Smart Comp 3. And I prefer using a soft knee on all 4 serial compressors because they in turn create a bit of a soft knee and a curve. So effectively it's applying soft on soft in terms of knee. It's making the compression curve even gentler and smoother. So first up is the clean style. So this is the most neutral of the styles. It's meant to shape the level without adding deliberate saturation. And I think it sounds quite nice. Jeff limped into the break room like a man who had been emotionally mugged by 3 genres and a possum. His coat, very clean, very nice sounding, smoothly compressed. Basically my preference. It controls the peaks, even out at the performance, and it sounds like a straightforward modern digital compressor doing its job. And this is, frankly, how I use it in a dialogue chain. This is where Smart Comp is working at its best. If we listen to it in the smooth style, let's listen to the same section. Jeff limped into the break room like a man who had been emotionally mugged by 3 genres and a possum. His coat was scorched. His hair. This is the peril of serial compression. It is amplifying and multiplying the effect of the compression to make it sound quite unpleasant, as you can hear. It has picked up audible saturation rather than subtle glue. And funny enough, you would expect that to get worse with the aggressive style. But let's... Jeff limped into the break room like a man who had been emotionally mugged by 3 genres and a possum. So it's still too thick, it's still too saturated, it's still too distorted, but it is actually not as bad as the smooth one, which it feels a bit more deliberate, a bit less accidental, still not pleasant. Custom is a bit different. So custom, if I pull up the curve here, custom lets you control the settings in a much more detailed way. So it lets you control both the timing and the saturation curve, how much saturation is applied with the number just here, and also how the curve bends based on character, which can run from down here, -50, when it's very similar to the punchy curve, all the way up to +50 when it has much more of this kind of kink in the middle. So I have deliberately set the character curve to the opposite end from punchy. I've set the attack to be like this and haven't really touched the release. So if we have a listen, the custom curve. Jeff limped into the break room like a man who had been emotionally mugged by 3 genres and a possum. His coat. So not only is serial compression making things way distorted because it's doing this 4 times, it is, honestly, it's sounding like it's through some sort of lo-fi filter. It's not something I would want to listen to for more than about half a second. So what, if we do things a bit differently, we can listen to how they affect if you only have one instance of each. So if we change this to clean, that means only the 4th instance is now smooth. We'll quickly change the same things on the aggressive. And then for the custom, again, we just change the 1st, the 2nd, and the 3rd to clean, so that only one of the compressors is applying the style. This time, there won't be the multiplicative effect. So smooth sounds like this. Jeff limped into the break room like a man who had been emotionally mugged by 3 genres and a possum. You can still hear the harmonics and the distortion, but it's much less unpleasant. Jeff limped into the break room like a man who had been emotionally mugged by 3 genres and a possum. And this time, the difference between smooth and aggressive is much smaller. And for custom, Jeff limped into the break room like a man who had been emotionally mugged by 3 genres and a possum. Sounds like turning a voice into an electric guitar. Broadly speaking, if I just really want to reiterate this point, stick with clean for dialogue. That is the way to use this compressor on dialogue. As you will have noted, it is possible to change the attack and the release in a fairly customized way. You can, for attack, change the shape of the curve. If I change this back to custom, you can change the attack to be curved like this at the start, as well as changing the attack time. If you see it changing up here, and attack hold can also be changed. Release, you can again change the shape of the curve and the angle of it, which is, of course, then the release time. But I will change that back to auto, in which case you just ignore what this says. It is overriding it. Just in case you are less familiar with compressors, attack time controls how quickly the compressor starts reducing gain after the signal crosses the threshold. So for dialogue, slower attacks let more of the leading edge of consonants through and transients before compression kicks in, which preserves articulation and a sense of immediacy. Fast attacks clamp down earlier, which can make level more controlled, but blunt initial edges if you push them too far. For me, I stick with this 50. It might be a bit fast for my first compressor, but I'm happy with it. Play around with it if you are setting up these compressors yourself. Release, of course, is how quickly the compressor then stops reducing gain. So longer releases hold gain reduction for longer between phrases, which can smooth out level variations but makes the voice feel a little held. Shorter releases let the gain reduction recover quickly, which keeps more of the natural rise and fall of speech, but it can be noticeable if you make it far too short. I've always found it safer to leave it on auto release. One of the most unique features of Smart Comp, not just Smart Comp 3, but the other versions as well, is the Spectral compressor. So when it acts as a standard broadband compressor, it sounds like this. Jeff limped into the break room like a man who had been emotionally mugged by 3 genres and a possum. Compare that with the Spectral compression on. Jeff limped into the break room like a man who had been emotionally mugged by 3 genres and a possum. So to me, Spectral compression being on lets it control a much greater degree of the underlying variation in the voice, what makes it sound interesting. You know, I don't see the point in using Smart Comp 3 without Spectral compression on to some point. So spectral compression analyzes the signal in many narrow frequency bands and applies more or less gain reduction per band instead of treating it all as one lump as it would with broadband compression. So the idea is that you get clearer and more controlled dynamics without the whole signal, ducking down every time one frequency region gets loud. The main controls in spectral compression when on are amount, which effectively is a depth or sensitivity control. At low values, it's closer to broadband compression. At high values, it becomes much more active and the color shaping becomes much more applicable. And then color also affects how the weighting affects on the spectral engine. So if you use a neutral, it treats everything even-handedly. If you set it to bright, it controls the lows more, so the highs stay clearer, and warmer controls the highs more, so the lows are clearer. They're not a substitute for EQ, and personally, I always just leave this on neutral. I prefer to leave EQ to be handling that sort of stuff. The other thing you can control in spectral compression is the band in which it operates. So if you change this, you can change the area, the kilohertz or hertz that the spectral compressor works in. So you can confine spectral compression just to a specific area. So you might want to confine it to work just in the de-essing region, or just stopping dialogue getting boxy. Anything outside the band that you leave here, so for example, anything outside below 737 hertz or above 3,500 hertz, here will just be broadband compressed rather than spectrally compressed. Input riding is something I typically avoid in this compressor because I prefer to handle it a different way. It does a kind of a gentle, continuous version of what you might do with clip gain or a dedicated leveler before the dynamic stage, but I actually use Tri-Leveler 2+, which is my own kind of private version of Tri-Leveler 2, to do this after the dynamics chain. But I'll run through the controls anyway. The target is, of course, the target level for the input riding. The amount is how much it actually corrects, and the speed, which has the option of fast, slow, and medium, controls how quickly it follows changes in loudness. If you've got Gain Rider 3, Tri-Leveler 2, Tri-Leveler 2+, or Waves Gain Rider, you don't need this. And to be honest, if you can do it manually, that's even better. I generally leave this off. I can't think of a single occasion in which I've had it on. Now, on to one of the most interesting things about SmartComp 3. So, SmartComp 3 does the normal stuff of, external sidechain. It lets you route a different signal into the plugin sidechain input and let that drive the gain reduction rather than the main input. And you can use that for broadband ducking if you turn spectral ducking off, in which case it works just as any sort of ordinary ducking, and spectral ducking, where the plugin looks for overlapping energy between the main input and the sidechain and only ducks in those regions. That is then spectral sidechain compression. And to be honest, it's almost indistinguishable from spectral sidechain EQ. They overlap massively. It's a dynamic process, and it's one of the distinctive features of the SmartComp line. I really like using this, and I've used it extensively back from SmartComp 2. So alternatively though, and slightly confusingly, Sonible also call this this option as internal sidechain. So this is how the detector listens to the input it already has. So it has its own EQ filters, but it isn't EQing the order. Basically, it's EQing the input so that it acts on a EQ'd version of the input, but without actually EQing the audio. So, for example, you can stop a low-end thump from driving gain reduction. You can make it more sensitive to the 2 to 5 kilohertz area if you want it to react primarily to intelligibility cues. Boosting a band in the sidechain EQ tells the detector to react more when this region gets loud. Cutting it says ignore it unless it's extreme, so you can bias it towards sibilance or towards or away, low frequency rumble, but without actually then having to change the audible tone of the main signal as you would if you actually EQ'd it. Practically, this conceptually does overlap with the limiting the spectral compression range, but it is not the same thing. Sidechain EQ, including when it's internal sidechain, shapes when the compressor engages. Spectral compression shapes where the gain reduction is applied once the compressor is already working. So one is a before and the other is an after. So external sidechaining is most obviously useful when you have two competing elements and one of them is more important. So the classic examples are ducking music under voiceover. So you put the compressor on the music track and you feed the signal from the dialogue, and then the music dips when the voice speaks. And if you enable spectral ducking, it ducks primarily in the frequency regions where they clash, which gives a very subtle and a very nice effect. Similarly, you can do that with ambience. You can do that with FX. I use this extensively when I produce voiceover demos. Broadband sidechaining will always be much more audible than spectral sidechaining. And I recommend using this on other tracks that are competing with dialogue, not dialogue itself. You shouldn't be ducking the dialogue based on the music. Always do it the other way around. You can change this from stereo mode to mid-side mode. So a function that was in Smart Comp 2 was that you could effectively tell it had 6 tracks, 6 channels in the audio, even though you were dealing with just stereo audio. And rather than operating in mid-side mode, it would operate in a more surround sound mode. And I found the effect that this had on being able to control exactly where you ducked the music in a demo to be very, very effective, because I could make it duck the center where the dialogue was, because of course dialogue's mono, much more effectively. It doesn't look like that functionality is in Smart Comp 3, which is a bit disappointing. But it was always a bit of a weird trick, and I will look into this more and see if it can still be done. It might be that that trick is no longer required. It might just sound the better way already. On to phase. Smart Comp 3 gives you 2 global phase modes, a minimum phase 0 latency mode and a linear phase mode. So minimum phase is designed for live use, and linear phase is designed for when the extra latency is fine, so for mixing and post-production. So I have been recording with this video with compressor off, but if I unbypass the FX, you're now listening to me, hopefully undistorted. Let's make sure I am actually running all these on clean. You should now be hearing my audio with the serial spectral compressor enabled, and hopefully my voice is still in sync with my face. It might not be, if to be honest, if I think I've got Lookahead turned off, so if it is truly acting as 0 latency, I will still be in sync. If there is any latency at all, I will have just gone out of sync. So let's wait and see in the final video what happened there. I'll turn it off just in case it has gone out of sync. So that is it in effect. When I've been live streaming recently, I have not had a compressor on my voice. I am rather excited to be able to start using a compressor when live streaming. And it is one of the functionalities in Smart Comp 3 I'm most excited about. As you will have noted, as I did just mention it, there is also now customizable and disableable Lookahead. Now, in Smart Comp 2, Lookahead was fixed. I believe it was fixed at 100 milliseconds and couldn't be turned on or off. In Smart Comp 3, you can set Lookahead to be anywhere between 1 millisecond and 20 milliseconds. So longer Lookaheads lets the compressor catch fast peaks more precisely and starts gain reduction in a more controlled way. But it does make the response more smooth, and it increases practical delay even in minimum phase mode. So they interact. So in minimum phase mode, you already have 0 latency. So any Lookahead you add is a deliberate choice to trade some of that snap for peak control and to deliberately add latency. My preference is to have 0 Lookahead in minimum phase mode, because otherwise, what is the point of using minimum phase mode? In linear phase mode, you're already accepting latency. So in that point, you're going to want to probably use some amount of Lookahead. I wouldn't peg it at 20 milliseconds by default, though. It should be a conscious decision based on how much you're willing to trade immediacy for control. And it can kind of flatten the feel of the dialogue a bit too much. Group mode, as I've got here, is new in Smart Comp 3. It lets you link multiple instances so you can control threshold, ratio, tap release, and etc. from a single window. All the grouped instances show up together in that compression matrix. So you can keep drums or stack vocals or stems under dynamic control. But honestly, for dialogue-centric work, the benefit is minimal. There is some slight advantage, for example, being able to switch between the different passes without having to click out here. But, the time saving is minimal. And because all my passes are quite similar in where they are, if you look here, it's actually quite hard. I can select this one. I can select this one. I'm not even sure how I select the other ones because they're kind of covered up. So the benefit of groups is I haven't found it very functional yet. I suspect it will get better as kind of the first updates for Smart Comp 3 come in. But it's certainly not a reason to upgrade from Smart Comp 2 or from a different compressor itself. So what are my thoughts about Smart Comp 3 overall? So conceptually, I like the idea of the learning function and being able to analyze the signal against a profile. I see how that would work for music, but I don't do music. And for dialogue, I find it particularly unhelpful. Not even not helpful, but unhelpful. I love Sonible's learning in Smart EQ. I like it in Smart Limit, and I'm very fond of it in Smart DS. But in Smart Comp 3, I feel much the same about it as I do in Smart Reverb 2. I don't like what it ends up doing or suggesting. It's a nice visualizer, but I find that the semantic labels, the snappy and punchy, the dynamic and dense, get in the way of simply setting the things that I know I want. And I think it will set anyone who is unfamiliar with compression way down the wrong line if they're dealing with dialogue. So you need to use the learn process, as far as I'm aware, to enable most of the functionality. But once you've done it, just ignore it, in my opinion. My conclusions about styles are straightforward. Clean sounds fantastic in a serial setup or solo. Smooth doesn't sound great on narration, whether serial or solo. Aggressive doesn't either, and custom just sounded absolutely terrible. Given that saturation is built into the styles, I would just stick with the clean style and avoid saturation altogether when it comes to dialogue. Leave it out of narration work. Spectral compression is, of course, one of the distinctive parts of Smart Comp, whether used in spectral ducking or used more in the standard spectral compression. In many ways, it's like something like Soothe 2 or McDSP SA3. I like McDSP SA3. I actually use it on top of Smart Comp. I like the fact that you can limit its range and use spectral color modes. I generally crank it up to maximum. I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't. But I've always found that it keeps my voice sounding more like my voice. Input riding, it's a perfectly reasonable input gain rider, but if you have tools like Gain Rider 3 or Tri-Leveler 2, it's redundant, and to be honest, it might teach you bad habits, and it is better to be trying to control the levels that you're recording at than trying to rely on a gain rider. On the other hand, it can help control for recording on different days, different sessions, etc. Sidechaining remains a very strong feature. It was a strong feature in Smart Comp 2. It remains a strong feature in Smart Comp 3. For dialogue, its main value is in ducking music and sound effects around the voice in a more frequency-aware way than a traditional broadband sidechain compressor. And I love the fact that the internal sidechain EQ is there, not just the external sidechain EQ. So I use this to manage everything around the dialogue, but not the dialogue itself. In summary, Smart Comp 3 is pretty good. I mean, I am a fan of Smart Comp 2. It's not a surprise I'm a fan of Smart Comp 3. I really like how clean it sounds, and it has a lot of extra functionality around the spectral ducking, the external internal sidechaining that I like, and the fact that it does allow for a lot of customization in many different ways where it wasn't even customizable in Smart Comp 2. There are a couple of areas where I think they could improve, such as the groups, and a little bit of the functionality is not quite as controllable as I would like, especially with the additional 6-channel functionality appearing to have disappeared since Smart Comp 2. But it's a great plugin. I believe the current price for upgrades, if you have Smart Comp 2, is about $29, £25, something like that. I highly recommend it, and there is a link in the description below the video. It is an affiliate link, so I will get a little bit of money if you buy via the link. And if you do, thank you very much. Every little bit helps. I hope you've enjoyed watching this review. Thank you again to Sonible for giving me a copy of Smart Comp 3 just a few hours after release, and I've tried my utmost to get this review out as quickly as possible. But I will see you next time for my videos as I return, I believe, back to some microphone reviews. I think next week I'm covering the MKH50. So I will see you then. Thank you for watching.